Hey guys, it's me, Dax Castro again, and I am here with some bonus content. I have the bonus content that I promised you. I hope that you have had an amazing time here at InDesign and Accessibility Summit. I know that I've had an amazing time putting together the material and presenting it and answering all of your questions, but I didn't want to leave you without two things that I just couldn't fit in the time frame that I had to present my classes. So in this video, we're going to cover two things. The first is how to remediate an advanced table when you don't have access to the source, meaning you don't have an InDesign file, you can go back and change the table structure. What do? Well, there's a way to change the table structure in the tags tree without touching the visual layout that makes the table more compliant. And we're going to talk about exactly what to do, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. All right, the next thing that we're going to cover is what to do when you have tables full of check marks, right? If you're using symbols like check marks or X's or something like that, maybe sometimes you assume the screen reader is going to say check mark. Well, it might not be the case, and I'm going to show you in this example exactly what I mean. So let's not waste any more time. I know your brains are probably already in overload. All right, so in this next example, we are going to talk about how to solve tables, complex tables, when you don't have access to the source. When you are simply trying to make sense of or remediate a table when you just have the PDF. So let's take a look at this example. So now that you understand stacking order and why spanned column headers don't work when it comes to accessibility, let's talk about how to fix that, right? So here we have our table and we've got system-wide, urban, rural, and small community. We're going to ignore the color contrast errors for right now, and we're going to just focus on how to make this table compliant. So let's go ahead and export this out as a PDF. And this is table 8. All right, so here we are, table 8. We are going to take a look at this structure, right? And we're going to open up our tags tree. Let's delete that empty one out of there. And we just have our table here. And it's separated into the T head and the T body, right? Now we know we need to turn these merged cells into a first column, right? But we also know that we need to add another column header here at the top. Our remediated sample here shows scope is our top header. So we need to create that cell. So how do we do that? Let's go back to Acrobat here, and we have our T head, and there's our row. We open up our TR, and inside here we have all of our THs, and you can see they all go in order, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new tag, and it's gonna be a table header cell, and we're gonna give it a nickname. The title is really just kind of a tooltip to help you make sense of and keep track of where you are. I like to do it because it helps me make sure that I understand exactly where I am and what I'm editing. So I'm gonna call this scope, and I'm going to hit OK. So now I have this scope, but it's in the wrong place. We're going to drag it up here underneath this TR so that it's right in line with everything else. Now it doesn't have any content in it, and we can't really add any in the table. It would make it really awkward. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on it and go to properties. We're going to set actual text for the word scope because that's what we wanted to say for that column header, right? So let's go ahead and do that and hit close. Now we have our columns, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now the one thing we do know is that we have 2 rows here, right? So we need to make sure that we set this first column to span those 2 rows. So how do we do that when you can't get to it in the table editor? Well, here's how you do it. You right click and you go to properties, and then you go to edit attribute objects. And inside this attribute objects, if you don't see anything here, you're going to hit new item. And then inside the attribute object item number 1, you're going to go to new item. And then now you're going to set a key. The key is the object that we're creating, and the value is the description for that object, right? So if we go here and we take a real quick look at some names here. So here are some terms that you should know: call span and row span and scope. So when you're setting the column span, it's an integer. When you're setting the row span, it's an integer. An integer is another word for number. So just remember, if it's a column span of 5, 5's a number, so it's an integer. If it's scope of row or column, the words row and column are names, right? So your scope is a name, right? So that helps you remember. So if we go back into Acrobat, our key value here is going to be row span. And now remember, the capitals matter. So capital R, capital S, row span. And the value is 2 because we have 2 rows that we're spanning, right? And is it a name? No, it's an integer because it's a number. So we want to change that and hit OK. So now we've set the row span of 2. Now we also need to set the scope, right? So we're going to go back up here to our attribute object and we're going to go to new item. The key is scope. The value is the name of it. Is it column or row? And in this case, it is column. And then the value is name because it is a name. Column is a name, right? So we hit OK. And then we hit OK. Now we close that out. So now we've set that. And how do you check it? How do you know what's going on if you can't see it, right? So you can't go into table editor because table editor is going to create a mess. But there's a tool, it's a free tool, and it's called Callus PDF Go HTML. And what it does is it renders out your PDF document as an HTML document so that you can inspect it, right? So we're going to go ahead and now that we've saved this, we're going to double check our work here real quick, right? So we're going to go to plugin and Callus PDF Go, and it's going to open up an HTML page. And if we look here, we can see, in fact, we do have scope and it does span these 2 cells. And we can also see here that we've got some more work to do because we don't have a quite formed table. We haven't put our system-wide and rural and urban into that first column yet. So step 1. We've created our heading. Now, step 2 is we're going to go to our T-body, right? And our T-body says system-wide is in that first row, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to open up the second row and we're going to drop that right into that second row and delete our first row, right? Now, this is our system-wide. Matter of fact, I'm going to even put system-wide, just so I'm clear. I make sure I remember where everything is, right? And again, we're going to right click on it and we're going to go to properties and we're going to go to edit attributes. And you can see in here that it already has a call span of 8, but we know that's not right, right? So we're going to delete that because it no longer has any column span at all. Yes, we want to delete it. And we're going to do a new entry and we're going to do row span. And how many rows do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because we have the subtotal. And is it a name? Nope, it's an integer. And we hit OK. So now we've got that set up and we hit OK and then close. Now, one thing we want to do, let's go back and double check again. Let's save and go back into our Callus PDF Go. And then we're going to go back in here and let's take a look. And look, it shows up and it's good to go. It seems like we've got everything set up for that one section. It seems like it's all correct. So we are good to go. So now we're going to keep continuing on with the next one. Let's do urban, right? So now we're going to go back in here and we're going to go to our next row. Actually, we're going to go down until we get to urban, right? And then I find it easiest to navigate with the keys. I'm just hitting down and right to open up or left to close them down. So there's our urban, and we're going to label this urban, right? And then let's find our rural. There's our row. There is our TD because we want the table data cell, not the row, right? So this is rural, right? and we forgot to do something here. So we're going to do that here in just a second, because this is just simply a table data. It's not a heading cell yet. Even though we saw it in PDF, the PDF viewer as in the right place on the right shape, it wasn't set as a heading cell. So let's go ahead and do all these first. So there's our rural, and then we're going to come down here to small community, and we're going to open up small community, and we're going to set this to small c. And then we're going to hold down Control, click, click, click. Then we're going to right click and go to Properties. And we could type in TH because we know it's table heading, or you could select it from the drop down cells and hit table heading cell and hit close. And they all change all in one shot, but we still have to move them, right? They still have to go in their right places, and we have to set their scope and span. So now that we've got system-wide is all squared away, this table row needs to go down one, right? And then delete the row, the empty row. This one needs to go down one and delete the empty row. And this one, you guessed it, needs to go down one. Make sure it's inside the cell and delete the empty row. So now we have them moved into each of their places. Now we need to set the scope and the span. So we're going to right click on this, and you cannot you can't click each of these and go into properties. These edit attributes are grayed out. You have to do them one at a time. So we're going to go right click and go to properties, and then we're going to go to edit attributes, and we're going to delete the call span. Yep. And we're going to do a new item, and this is a row span, capital R, capital S. And in this one, we have 1, 2, 3. We're a value of 3. And it's not a name, it's an integer because it's a number. And hit OK. And then the scope, new item, scope, value is row because it is a row and it is a name. So we hit OK and hit close and hit close. And now we go to the next one, rural. We go to properties and then edit attributes. We're going to, delete that one. And we're going to add a new one. And this is going to be row span. Remember, capital R, capital S. The value is, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to change that guy to integer. Hit OK and hit OK and hit close. And now we're going to go to small community, properties, edit attributes. You guessed it, delete the call span. We're going to add a new item, and this is going to be row span. Always remember the capitals. If you don't remember the capitals, this won't work. And this is 1, 2, 3, right? Because subtotal is 3. Capital is its own, subtotal is 3. And not 4, but 3. And this is an integer. And hit OK. And then a new item, and this is scope of row, and it is a name. Hit OK. And now we hit close. Now, the last thing we need to fix is capital total, right? So capital total spanned before 1, 2, but we added a new one over here. So it should span 3 and not 2. And let's check that out just so we can see what it looks like, right? So let's save this before we do that and go to Calisco. We go back in here and we can see in here that everything looks great except this last guy. We're off by 1 cell, right? That's why this Calisco PDF Go is really a cool tool, because it allows you to kind of see very visually where you're messed up, right? I think it's much more consistent than the table editor, but it does require you going out and kind of, using this, using your browser, right? So capital total needs to span 1 more. So we're going to close that out. Now this one, you could go into the table editor. So now that we've got this all set up and it's good to go, we can go into our table editor and we can go to capital total, go to cell properties, column span is 3, hit OK, yes, and we're good to go. Now, realize that when you start doing these complex associations and complex changes, the table editor is not going to probably render your table exactly the way you'd think it will. Now this looks pretty darn close, right? But there is some overlap issues kind of going on here that you just have to simply ignore, because you know you've checked it with the Callus PDF Go. Again, we go back out here and we look at this and we can see, in fact, everything is completely correct. All of our scopes, all of our headings, everything is all right. All right, guys, so that is how you change lemons into lemonade by fixing your spanned row or spanned column headers into row headers. I know that's a little bit of an advanced topic, but we run into this a lot, right? And you have to be able to remediate those PDFs, especially when you only have the PDF and you don't have the source. Of course, when you have the source file, of course, you would want to go in and do exactly that same thing inside InDesign. And you can see here, if you look at this, it looks a lot like the table structure. Matter of fact, exactly like the table structure that we saw in PDF Go, which lets us know we did it right? Okay, guys. All right, so let's move on to our next topic. All right, for this next one, we are going to go into looking at symbols, especially Unicode symbols, right? Sometimes we use wingdings and other symbology inside our tables, especially when it comes to things like this, where we have checkboxes, right? So the first thing we want to do, again, is we're going to take this table out of our table heading, right? And we're going to paste it up on top and get rid of this cell across the top, right? I hope that I've ingrained this into you enough. I've repeated it, I don't know how many times now. Do not put your table titles inside your tables. All right, so before we call this in this first cell assessment category, right? So we're going to assume that we're able to actually put that text in there as a viewable text. But if not, then you could simply highlight over it and color it the same color as the background and call it good. But this is more about these symbols, right? We do this a lot. We put a checkbox in there instead of the word yes or no. And I will tell you that it's, when you have the choice, when you have the ability, it's always best to put the text in there, right? Yes or no. It's super clear. It's not as fancy, but it's much more meaningful, and it doesn't require you to go through a bunch of extra steps. You got to know what to do when you have to do it a certain way. So we're going to assume that you can't write yes or no, but that you must use a checkbox. So how do you make it say check mark, right? You'd think it's pretty easy. Come in here and insert a checkbox symbol, which is what we've done here. But let's take a look at what this sounds like when we go to JAWS, right? Or NVDA. So let's go ahead and do File, Save, and do File, Export, Interactive PDF. That's right. And this is Table 11. And then 11 and hit OK and hit OK. Off we go. All right, so I'm going to put in my earphone here and let's listen to what JAWS has to say.
Table with 8 columns and 8 rows.
All right, table with 8 columns and 8 rows.
Needs assessment, row 2. Upper basin, column 2. Strengthening, eudiaresis, row 3.
Strengthening eudiaresis.
Ore sampling, 3, row 4. Environmental impact analysis, eudiaresis.
Okay, so here we're hearing again, eudiaresis.
Endangered species study, eudiaresis, row 6.
I don't know what that is.
Blank, row 7, public access, checkmark bullet, row 8.
Hey, there we go, checkmark bullet, right? So what's the difference? They all look like check marks to me. Let's go back to the InDesign file and see if we can figure this out. So if we go back to the InDesign file, let's go ahead and turn off
Quit JAWS dialog. Start tables.in.
And let's do some inspection here. So if we take a look at these, you can see that this says Wingdings 2, this is Wingdings, and this is Zaf Dingbats, and some more Wingdings and Wingdings down here, right? So let's take a look. Let's change this real quick to Arial. And what do we get? Well, we've got our eudiaresis right there. That's what we were hearing. And then we were hearing the number 3 for that other one, right? So it's deceiving. it isn't what you might expect. And the only way you're going to catch that is by using a screen reader to test. So what do? How do you get the right mark in there, right? So the first thing you want to make sure is that you're using a Unicode font, right? So Wingdings happens to be a Unicode font. Arial happens to be a Unicode font. And there are several others that you can use. But remember, testing is always super important to make sure you understand what it is that it's going to be saying, right? So in this case, we know that if we open up our type, and then if we go to Glyphs. So if you open up the Glyphs panel here, you can see that we do in fact have two different ones. We have Wingdings 2, and then we have Wingdings, right? So the Wingdings version is a Unicode font, and it says what we expect. It says checkmark, right? The other one says the other word that was definitely not checkmark. So you want to make sure you test, right? So now that we know that that's a correct one, we can highlight these guys over, and we can paste all this in. And I know that all these other ones were set. So let's go ahead and close this back out and save this. File, export, table 11, and then hit save, right? Oh, it's already open. Let's go ahead and close that. And then file, export, interactive PDF, table 11, save, yes, yep, and off we go, right? So now let's open up JAWS again.
JAWS Home Manual. Tables examples - Adobe Acrobat Pro DC. AV page view. Tables 11.pdf document. Page has no links. Tables 11.pdf table 2-1. Water management priorities. Table with 8 columns and 8 rows. Assessment category upper base and lower base space.
All right. So now we're back into our table again. Let's enter table editor or table mode. So let's go ahead and inspect this.
Checkmark bullet. Row 2. Checkmark bullet. Row 3.
Checkmark bullet.
Checkmark bullet. Checkmark bullet. Checkmark bullet. Checkmark bullet. Checkmark bullet.
Music
Row
to
6.
my ears. Checkmark bullet all around, right? So if we want to hear, remember, this table doesn't have the heading set for the heading rows. So we would have to go in here and select the table, go into table editor, and highlight those, cell properties, header cell, and this is a row. Remember, it's a row. Hit OK. These are probably column already. Actually, they're not going to be scoped. So remember, InDesign by default does not set the scope for the headings. But remember what we know about WCAG. WCAG says that if your table is a simple first column, first row for headings, you don't need to set the scope to be compliant. But PDF UA, you do. You do need to have that scope set. So we're going to set that to column and hit OK and hit save. So we're going to close that document after we save it.
Tables examples - Adobe Acrobat Pro
DC. Open that back up again.
Page has no links. Tables 11.pdf table 2-1. Water management prior space.
All right. And now
table with 8 columns. Assessment category upper basin. Needs assessment. Checkmark bullet. Row 2.
Right.
Column 2. Row 2. Upper basin needs assessment. Checkmark bullet.
Right. So upper basin needs assessment. Checkmark bullet. Right. So that tells you very clearly that upper basin needs assessment is checked, right? It is not an ambiguous experience. You're getting that good user experience. So that's a way you handle check marks inside your tables, right? So now when it comes to X's or other, maybe you use a different symbology, you have to think about what it is that you want the user to hear, right? Because if this was upper basin X, is that really what you wanted to hear? Or do you want them to hear upper basin needs assessment selected, right? Well, then if it's going to be selected, then you need to go through and set actual text for each of those characters, which may not be something you want to make the time to do, right? So you have to think about and the trade-offs between user experience, the time you have, and if you have access to the source as the way you develop your methodology to handle every solution, because every situation is going to be different. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this session. I sure had fun walking you through the nuances of tables. It is a super complex issue, and honestly, we could spend all day long just talking about tables. So I hope that you got enough out of this to take the mystery out of what it means to make accessible tables. My name is Dax Castro. I am an Adobe certified PDF accessibility trainer. I run a Facebook group called PDF Accessibility, It's a great place to go get resources to get your questions answered from some of the greatest minds in the PDF accessibility industry, because we've got some great people in there. Our own Chad Chilius is in there. Kenny Moore from Tagged PDF. If you ever have been to his site, he's got some great information, and Bevy is in there, and Colleen is in there as well. We're all in there answering questions on everything related to PDF accessibility. And you can also check me out using the keyword PDF accessibility on YouTube. I do post some videos on there as well. My name is Dax Castro. This has been an amazing session. I hope you get a lot out of it. Find me on LinkedIn, and I'll see you in the next video.